So we had completed book 2 till reading 11, and now two readings are left, 12 and 13. So 12 is about risk management for individuals, and 13 is about risk management for institutions. So today we'll be covering the reading 12, that is risk management for individuals, and then later next week we will do reading 13. So it is a long reading, and most of it is theory with only a few calculations, and most part of this reading is revolving around insurance and annuities. And within insurance and annuities, you will see that the focus is on insurance, and with the focus is on life insurance specifically. Why? Because life insurance is important to protect human capital. So we discussed a bit of human capital earlier as well. Now we will be discussing it in detail. And we also discussed financial capital. We discussed that traditional finance only considers financial capital, while there is another type of capital that is also very important, which is human capital. But traditional finance tends to ignore human capital. So in behavioral finance, what we do is we combine human capital with financial capital, and then we analyze the total capital when we are taking decisions for, and we consider total capital when we are taking decisions for any individual or institution. So how to protect human capital? How should we reduce the risk related to human capital? The methods used to reduce the risk related to human capital, protect human capital, are insurance and annuity. And within those, one of the key methods is life insurance. Why? Because human capital of an individual is based on his life or his skills or his abilities to earn money in future. So in order to protect those skills, you can buy some kind of insurance, and one of those kinds of insurance is life insurance. Apart from that, there are other types of insurances. There are annuities that we will be discussing in this topic, but you will see that the focus will be on life insurance. So starting with introduction, risk management for individuals, you already know, is a key element of life cycle finance. What is a life cycle finance? Life cycle finance is that finance that takes a holistic view of individuals' financial situation. What does it mean? It means that it does not only consider financial assets, but it considers financial assets as well as human capital. That is financial capital as well as human capital. So life cycle finance is that finance which takes a holistic view. That is a view considering both the financial assets or financial capital as well as human capital to help the individuals achieve their goals or objectives. So far in finance in level 1 and level 2, we discussed only, or our focus have only been on financial capital. Now we are also mixing human capital with that financial capital. So moving on, human capital and financial capital. So if we make a traditional balance sheet, in traditional balance sheet we have assets and liabilities related to financial capital. But there is another type of balance sheet that is known as economic balance sheet. What is economic balance sheet? Economic balance sheet is the balance sheet that accounts for financial capital as well as human capital. So if I also include human capital assets in this balance sheet, then it will become economic balance sheet, also known as holistic balance sheet. So before we go into details, first let's clear out, or let's understand what is the actual difference between human capital and financial capital. So remember, human capital is the capital which is dependent on an individual's skills or an individual's ability to earn money in future. And how do we quantify it? It is simply the NPV of an investor's future expected labor income weighted by the probability of surviving to each future state. So if I say that in future, let's say after 10 in first year he will earn $1,000, in second year he will earn $1,100, in third year he will earn $1,200, and so on. And there is a specific probability of him surviving or living for that age. Let's say there is a 90% chance of surviving this age, there is a 85% chance, there is a 80% chance of this age, and so on. So the probability weighted average of present values of these future cash flows that he can earn is known as human capital. What is financial capital? It includes the tangible and intangible assets which are not a part of human capital but are owned by an individual or household. It can be real estate, it can be stocks, it can be bonds, it can be any type of capital. Moving on further, discussing human capital in detail. So human capital, remember, tends to change over the life of an individual. So at the young age, human capital is very high, but at a later age or at an older age, the proportion of human capital is low. Generally, human capital is a dominant asset on households' economic balance sheet. Why a dominant asset? Because in order for any household to survive or for any household to meet its spending needs, there is an earner or there is an individual who is earning some money, and that is and the present value of all the earnings that he will make in future, or all the earnings that household will make in future, is a big value on the balance sheet or is a big item. It is important to understand investment characteristics of human capital. So like in financial capital, we have different kinds of characteristics. You have high risk instruments, you have low risk instruments, you have like bonds which are low risk, you have a stock that is high risk. Similarly, in human capital also you can have these types of you can have high risk and low risk types of capital or assets, and you can have stock like and bond like assets. What do we mean by it? So let's say maybe there is a person who is working in stock market, or who is a trader, stock trader. So a stock trader has stock market is a volatile market, and the risk associated with the stock market is very high. So if a stock market falls or if a stock market goes down, there is a possibility that the trader will suffer on his earnings, or trader's earnings will go down. If the stock market is going down, his earnings will go down. That means there is a high risk attached to his earnings. So in this case, his human capital will be a stock-like capital, where the risk is very high or where the volatility of earnings is very high. On the other hand, let's say there is a professor in a big university. So his job stability is much more higher, or job stability is much more better than this trader. Why? Because he is earning something and he is expected to keep earning that amount for his life or for next 20 years, 50 years or whatever. So in that case, his human capital will be bond-like. So human capital can be of different types, like high risk capital, low risk capital, can have characteristics like stocks, bonds, and etc. So when you calculate the present value or price of a stock, how do you calculate it? You calculate the present value of its future cash flows. And how do you calculate present value of future cash flows? You discount it using a discount rate. And if it is equity stock, you discount it at cost of equity. If you are calculating price of a bond, you will discount it at cost of debt. So discount rates for for all of the investments are different. Similarly, when you are calculating human capital, you need to calculate present value of future cash flows. And for calculating present value of future cash flows, you need a discount rate. Now this discount rate should be aligned with these free cash flows that you are discounting. What does it mean? So if the human capital have stock-like characteristics, then this rate should be higher. It should account for the risk associated with free cash flows. Or if it has bond-like characteristics, then its rate should be lower. It should account for the lower risk, or it should account for the stability or consider the stability in future cash flows. So your discount rate should be aligned with the kind of cash flows that you are discounting. So you should use a discount rate which reflects risk associated with future cash flows. For example, a lower discount rate will be used for government employee. Why? Because he has more job certainty and job stability compared to investment banking employee. Why? Because investment banking is a cyclical market, and the job losses and turnover and employee turnover is very high in investment banking. So there is high risk associated with it, and there is low risk associated with government employment. So rate with government employment should be lower discount rate, and discount rate for investment banking employee should be higher. And simply speaking, how do you calculate human capital? As we have already discussed, you discount back future cash flows to present. This W is your represent your wage or your income from employment, and if you discount it back to present and add all the future present value of future incomes, then you will get your human capital. Now, as we discussed, human capital is not just the present value, but it is kind of a probability weighted value. So you also need to account for the probability of a person surviving. So if we go into further details, or if we want to make the formula further efficient, then we need to add a probability here as well. So we will need to multiply the income with the probability of surviving in that year. So if we are taking income of 5th year, then we need to multiply it with the probability of surviving in that particular year. And what is this 1 plus g? If your income is growing at a certain rate every year, then you need to account for that growth rate as well. That is, multiply previous year's income with 1 plus growth rate. And in denominator you have 1 plus r, that is your discount rate. This discount rate has been broken down into two parts, that is risk-free rate and the risk premium. So this total r plus y will be your discount rate r. So simply speaking, what you need to do is you calculate present value of probability weighted future incomes, and that is your human capital. Now once you have human capital, you can put it into the balance sheet, and then you can analyze the total assets, that how much of the what is the total wealth of the individual and what is the proportion of human capital in total wealth or total balance sheet. These are the key assumptions required to estimate an individual's human capital that we have already discussed: probability of surviving, income from employment, the annual wage growth rate, risk-free rate, risk associated with the income, that is occupational income volatility. This premium will be higher for cyclical industry employees and will be lower for government employees or staples industry or non-cyclical industry employees. Length of working life in years. So if you know these parameters, or if you know these numbers, you should be able to calculate the human capital. This looks easy in the formula, but there are certain issues associated with estimating human capital. Why do we have these issues? Because we are taking so much of assumptions, and it is difficult to have accurate assumptions, or it is difficult to have to ensure that these assumptions that are being taken are accurate. Why? Because assumptions can be wrong. So that is a key issue with estimating human capital. Growth rates, nominal risk-free rates, risk adjustments, and mortality are not easily estimated. You are making assumptions, and your assumptions can be wrong. Wages do not tend to increase at a constant rate over an individual's lifetime. We are assuming a constant growth rate, while in reality the growth rate might not be constant. Mortality and disability risk can reduce the value of human capital. Average growth rate within occupations or even within the overall economy is unknown. Potential loss of human capital represents an important risk. Life and disability insurance are tools that can be used to reduce this risk. So what is the risk? Key risk associated with human capital? The key risks are that person can die, or the person may become disabled, or due to any other reason, maybe he is not able to earn as much money as he is expected to. So his earnings may go, the future earnings may go down. So this is the risk. And how do you control this risk, or how do you reduce this risk? You reduce this risk or manage this risk by using some kind of insurance. And within this insurance, you can have life insurance or annuities. So insurance and annuities. Annuity is also a kind of insurance, indirect insurance. So insurance and annuities are then used to reduce this risk. So this is how this reading will go on. So first we understood human capital, and after having understood human capital, now we'll move on to discussing different kinds of risk reduction strategies. So this is about human capital. Moving on, next topic is financial capital. So financial capital is pretty much easy. You already know about it. It is what is financial capital? It includes tangible and intangible assets. It includes personal assets and investment assets. Personal assets means the assets that you are using. For example, if you are living in a house, that is personal asset. Investment assets represent your investment. If you have bought a bond or an equity stock, that is investment asset. In some cases, there might be some assets that are personal assets as well as investment assets. So for example, a house can be a personal asset as well as an investment asset. Why? Because you use the house for your use as well, and also you sometimes invest into it for investment purposes or for return in future. There can be current assets and non-current assets that you would already know. Current assets are those from which economic benefits flow to you within a year. Non-current assets are those from which economic benefits are expected to flow for more than a year. Personal assets are assets which are consumed, often worth to individuals more than their fair value. So if you are living in a house for, let's say, past 20 years or 10 years or whatever, then that house or that home may worth to you more than its fair value. So generally personal assets are worth to individuals more than their fair value. Investment assets are those that are held for potential increase in value or to fund future consumption. Some assets may be personal as well as investment assets that we have already discussed, and these kind of assets are known as mixed assets, and an example is real estate. Moving on, a key issue with respect to financial capital or key consideration when dealing with financial capital is marketability. So marketability can be used as a criteria for subdividing assets. So you know which are personal assets and which are investment assets. Now further dividing them into to further divide them into subcategories, you can use marketability as a criteria. What is marketability? Marketability describes that how easy it is to trade an asset. If an asset has a high liquidity, that is there are many buyers and many sellers, then its marketability is said to be higher. And if there is an asset that have low liquidity, then its marketability is lower. So for example, publicly traded companies have high marketability, but private limited companies have low marketability. So when you are buying a publicly traded company, you know that its liquidity is, or buying shares of publicly traded company, you know its liquidity is high. You can easily sell or purchase shares in the stock market. So its marketability is high. But when you are investing into a private limited company, then its marketability is low because it is difficult to find a buyer when you want to sell it, or to find a seller when you want to buy share. So quite often when you are performing valuation of private limited companies, what you do is that you apply a marketability discount. That in other words is a discount for liquidity, or is a liquidity premium. Marketable assets can be further divided into publicly traded and non-publicly traded segments that we have discussed. Non-marketable assets include assets without any ready market, for example, human capital. Why? Because human capital cannot be traded. You cannot market it, it is difficult to sell it or buy it. Publicly traded market assets. Traditional balance sheets tend to emphasize publicly traded marketable assets. Value and risk characteristics are generally easier to estimate. Why easier? Because you have data available in the market. Include money market instruments, bonds, and common and preferred equity. Non-publicly traded marketable assets include real estate, business assets, collectibles. They also include annuities, for example, defined benefit pension. They also include cash value life insurance. What is cash value? We will be discussing this later in detail, but for now, what is cash value life insurance? It includes life insurance, that is protection against death, plus cash reserve. So if I combine these two instruments, that is a cash reserve and protection against death, then this becomes cash value life insurance. That is life insurance plus some type of cash accumulation vehicle, that you are insured against life or against death, and your money is also being invested somewhere, maybe into stocks or into bonds, and cash is being accumulated. So if you combine these two features or these two instruments, then it becomes cash value life insurance. So these are non-publicly traded marketable assets, and these are publicly traded marketable assets. And a major example of non-marketable asset that is not marketable at all is human capital. These assets will be more marketable, have high marketability. These have low marketability, but both are marketable. But human capital is mostly not marketable. On non-marketable assets can include employee pension plan, vested employee pension plan, and government pensions. So what are vested employer pension plans? Vested pension benefits are considered financial assets. Unvested pension benefit which are contingent on future work are considered part of human capital. So what is the difference between vested and unvested? Unvested are those which are contingent on something. That is, if you work in future, then you will get the benefit. So those unvested pension benefits are a part of human capital. Why? Because they are linked to you working in future, linked to your future earnings. Those are unvested pension benefits. What are vested? Vested are those in which a specific amount have already been contributed to your pension plan. So if an amount has already been contributed to your pension plan, that means that has become a part of your assets and that has become a financial asset. But if there is an amount that will be given to you based on your future work, then that means it is dependent on your future earnings. And if it is dependent on your future earnings, it is human capital. It has not been earned as yet, or you haven't liquidated it as yet. Again, how do you calculate the present value? Simply you calculate the present value by taking future benefit and multiplying it by the expected probability and dividing it by discount rate, 1 plus discount rate. Same formula as human capital. Only difference is there we used income. Here we are using benefit. Benefit is also a kind of income. And we are multiplying it by probability, and we are assuming that benefit will remain constant. If benefit is growing at a constant rate, then it should be multiplied by 1 plus G. Factors to consider when determining discount rate for valuation of pension plan. So how do you determine this discount rate, or how do you decide what should be the discount rate? So there are certain factors that you can consider. What are those factors? That include health of the plan, that is funding status, where plan's liability is estimated using an appropriate market-based discount rate. So what do you mean by funding status? Funding status means assets minus liabilities. So if funded status is high or is strong, that means the plan is healthy. That means plan has sufficient assets to offset liabilities, and these liabilities are estimated, or present value of these liabilities is estimated using market discount rate. So if assets are higher compared to present value of liabilities, then that means your plan is strong, and that means risk associated with the plan is lower. Credit quality of the sponsoring company. If credit quality is better, that means risk associated with the plan or company is lower, and if risk associated with the company is lower, then you can use a lower discount rate. If company has long-term bonds, the yield on the bonds can provide a proxy for an appropriate discount rate. So if a company has long-term bonds, then you can use the yield on those bonds as a proxy for this discount rate. So there is no one fixed criteria that or one fixed number that should be used as a discount rate. It can vary from plan to plan, or it can vary from company to company. You need to decide it based on the characteristics of the plan and the company. So this is about employer pension plans. Moving on, next is government pensions. Government pensions are the pensions that are given by government. They are generally more secure. Why? Because they are backed by government, and there is a very low risk of default by governments. Government pensions can be considered relatively bond-like. Why? Because they have low risk. Key considerations for government pension include: consider the financial health of the government entity sponsoring the defined benefit plan. Consider the legal framework and any accompanying political risk at the country level. So if there is a problem at country level, then pensions may suffer, and if there is a problem with that specific entity which is giving you the pension, then your pensions can be affected. So these are key considerations that you should make. So this is about marketable and non-marketable assets. Marketability is being used here as a criteria for subdividing assets. There can be other criteria that you can use, other criteria also that you can use for subdividing assets. And another criteria, one of those criteria is account type. Account type can also be used as a criteria for subdividing assets. What do we mean by account type? By account type, we mean that different accounts in which you keep your capital can have different tax attributes. So there can be taxable accounts, there can be tax deferred accounts, there can be tax exempt or non-taxable accounts. So you can further divide your financial capital or assets into with respect to account types. Accounts can generally be described as taxable, tax deferred and non-taxable, and we have already discussed it in previous class. Taxable are those in which an annual tax is applied on your income. Tax deferred are those in which you do not need to pay any annual tax, but at the time of withdrawal later you need to pay all the tax together. That is, tax is deferred to a later period. Non-taxable are those which are tax exempt, on which there is no tax at all. Moving on, within this section, the last concept is of net wealth. So there are two key terms that are used quite often in financial markets, that is net worth and net wealth. You should know the difference between these two. A lot of people or a lot of analysts tend to confuse net worth with net wealth, while these two are different concepts. What is net worth? Net worth is traditional assets minus traditional liabilities. Or in other words, net worth reflect, you can say, financial capital of the individual. What is net wealth? Net wealth takes into account financial capital as well as human capital. So net wealth takes financial capital, that is net worth, adds human capital to it, and also add present value of pension benefits, which are also a type of human capital. So if you add these two to net worth, that is financial capital, you will get your net wealth. So simply speaking, it is financial capital plus human capital. And in by human capital, I mean present value of future earnings as well as present value of pension benefits. And by financial capital, I mean traditional assets minus traditional liabilities. Net wealth considers future assets that can be used for consumption. What do we mean by future assets? It means human capital. That it does not account for only for current assets, but it also account for or does not only account for existing assets, but also account for future assets that you are expected to earn in future. So this is about understanding human capital and financial capital and the differences between these two. Now once you have understood this, the next step is to understand framework for individual risk management. That how should you manage an individual's risk. So what is a general framework for individual risk management? You come up with a risk management strategy for individual, that is, you decide risk management strategy. Then you look at the primary financial stages of the life of an individual, that which stage of life is individual passing through. Then you incorporate the human capital and financial capital concepts into his economic balance sheet. That is, you make an economic balance sheet in which you put financial capital as well as human capital. Once you have prepared this holistic balance sheet, then you explain how key components of that balance sheet develop over time. That over time, how may human capital reduce and how may financial capital increase, or how will the proportion change over time. Then you identify some of the primary risks to an individual. For example, maybe being disabled in future or any other risk, and how they evolve during an individual's lifetime. That how will a particular risk increase or decrease during the lifetime of the individual. So this is the framework that you use for risk management. Once you have identified all of this, then the next step is to decide what tools to use for risk reduction or risk avoidance or risk management, and then you select one of the tools and try managing the risk. So this is the framework for individual risk management. Let's start with the first one, that is risk management strategy for individuals. What do we mean by risk management strategy for individuals, or what do we do in risk management strategy? We specify the objective, that what is the actual objective. For example, objective can be to maximize household welfare through an appropriate balance of risk and safety. Then we identify risk. What are the risks? Risks can be related to, for example, earnings risk. What is earnings risk? The earnings risk is the risk of earnings going down in future. So if an individual is working in a cyclical industry, there is a risk that his earnings can suffer in future. Other risks can include premature death, longevity. Longevity is living longer than expected. So if an individual lives longer than the expectation, then there are chances that he may end up, uh, there are chances that he may not have assets to use for consumption, or he may not have enough wealth or enough money for consumption during the later stages of his life, or he may end up consuming all of his assets before that. Property risk, there can be property risk, there can be liability risk, there can be health risk. So we need to identify the risk, and once we have identified the risk, we need to determine that how should we assess the probability of loss associated with those risks. Moving on, once we have identified risk and once we have determined that how should we assess the probability of loss, then we move on to evaluating risk and selecting appropriate methods to manage the risk. What can be the appropriate methods? There can be 4 broad types of strategies, that is risk avoidance, risk reduction, risk transfer, and risk retention. Risk avoidance means that you completely avoid the risk. So for example, if you use if someone is using motorbike for as a means of transport, then there is a risk of accident. To avoid the risk, what he can do is he can stop using a vehicle or use some other means for travel. That is risk avoidance. There can be risk reduction, that is you still have the risk but you have reduced the risk. So for example, if you start wearing helmet, that can be risk reduction. You haven't avoided that risk but you have reduced the risk. There can be risk transfer, that is transferring the risk to third party. So for example, if you get your vehicle insured by the insurance company, that is risk transfer. You have transferred your risk to a third company, that is an insurance company. And risk retention, that is you retain the risk or you keep the risk and you do not reduce or transfer or avoid risk, or you go with the risk and you find that risk manageable. This is known as self-insurance or self-insure. That is, you are not buying any insurance, you are self-insuring yourself, and this is risk retention. So remember these 4 strategies, these are very important, and remember their definitions as well. Once you have evaluated risk and selected appropriate method to manage the risk, then you go on to monitoring outcomes and risk exposures and make appropriate adjustments in method. So later you may need to make appropriate adjustment in method. You may need to move from risk avoidance to risk reduction, or you may need to have risk transfer with risk reduction, or you may want to move to risk retention. So you monitor the outcomes and risk exposures and make appropriate adjustments in methods. So this is the first step, that is risk management strategy for individuals. Once you have planned the strategy, or once you have outlined the strategy, then you move on to studying or understanding the financial stages of life, that which financial stage is an individual currently passing through. So within financial stages, there can be multiple stages. There can be an education phase, there can be early career development, peak accumulation, pre-retirement, early retirement, late retirement. And key point to note is that risk characteristics of the individual will continue to change throughout these financial stages of life. And as he moves from one stage to another, his risk characteristics will change, and also his human capital will change. That means you first need to understand which stage is he currently in and which stage will he be in future, for you to be able to manage the risks associated with his investments or capital. So starting with the education phase is the one in which individual is investing in knowledge. There is little focus on savings and investments. Then he moves on to early career, which is in which he has completed the education and entered the workforce. Now at this point of time, when he has just started his career, his human capital is very high because he is dependent on the future earnings. At this point of time, he has high human capital, so it makes sense or maybe valuable for him to buy insurance on human capital. Why? Because human capital is a large portion of his total assets. He would have a very low financial capital because he has just started earning money, and major amount of his capital would be human capital. So at this point of time, in order to save or protect his human capital, he may want to buy insurance. After early career, he moves on to career development. That is normally during 35 to 50 years of age range. There is, in this time, that is career development, there is increased pace of retirement savings, that he has earned sufficient, he would be earning a good amount of money, and he then would start saving for his retirement. Then comes peak accumulation, which is generally 51 to 60 of age. And in this era or in this period, the individual is reaching maximum earnings. And on reaching maximum earnings, he is accumulating his wealth for goals and objectives. And there is more career risk at this point. That is, he is he is nearly reaching maximum earnings. So if he loses the job, that would be a bigger risk compared to losing a job at the early career. So there is more career risk at peak accumulation. You cannot bear losing a job at this point. Then you move on to pre-retirement, at which you have already, here in peak accumulation, you are reaching maximum earnings, and then once you have reached the maximum earnings, that is known as pre-retirement, when you are at maximum career income. So at that point of time, you start restructuring your portfolio to reduce risk, and you engage into tax planning as well. You also engage into tax planning at peak accumulation, but in pre-retirement, tax planning becomes one of the core agendas. Why? Because you have already reached maximum career income. Now you are not looking for further growth in income, but now you will be retiring soon, so you need to reduce risk with respect to your portfolio, and from accumulation you need to move on to a portfolio that is sufficient to satisfy your post-retirement needs. Then becomes early retirement, that is first 10 years of retirement. So individual have already accumulated quite good sum of money. So his first 10 years of retirement are very comfortable. He have comfortable income and sufficient assets. However, he need to grow assets for later period. So for first 10 years or for early retirement phase, he has enough assets, but he needs to grow these assets for a later period. And then we move on to late retirement. That is unpredictable because length of retirement is unknown, and there is also longevity risk. What is longevity risk? We just discussed it on previous slides. Longevity risk is the risk that you may outlive your life, that is, you may live longer than expected, and the chances are that you may end up using or consuming all your assets and wealth before your death. Use of how do you account for, or how do you reduce longevity risk? You use annuities to reduce your longevity risk. So these are the financial stages of life. Once you have formulated the strategy, then you move on to financial stages. So remember this whole framework and remember the key points or sub points within this framework, because if you are given a case study and if you are given an individual and if you are asked to develop a framework for individual for the risk management of that individual, you should be able to do that. So you will first outline the strategy, and in strategy you will discuss all these points. Then you will move on to discussing financial stages of life, in which you will identify which stage is he currently in. And then once you have identified it, you move on to making individual balance sheet. In balance sheet, you can have a traditional balance sheet or you can have a holistic balance sheet. In traditional balance sheet, you have assets and liabilities, which are both financial part of financial capital. You have liquid assets, you have investment assets, you have personal property, you have short-term liabilities, long-term liabilities. If in this balance sheet I also include human capital, then it will become my economic or holistic balance sheet. So like here I have included human capital and pension value. If I include these two, then it will become economic or holistic balance sheet. Also on liabilities side, I have lifetime consumption needs, that is present value of lifetime consumption needs. So So in economic balance sheet or holistic balance sheet, you account for the present value of all available marketable and non-marketable assets as well as all liabilities. It allows an individual to map out the optimal level of future consumption and non-consumption goals, allows an individual to anticipate how available resources can be used to fund consumption over the remaining lifetime. So this is the third step. First you develop or formulated the strategy, then you moved on to studying the financial stage, and now you are developing economic balance sheet or holistic balance sheet. Now within this you also check for changes in net wealth. So net wealth of an individual, as we discussed earlier, continues to change throughout the life of an individual, and throughout the life of an individual his human capital or his financial capital may also change. And we discussed that throughout the life of the individual, generally human capital tends to fall and financial capital tends to increase. That is, human capital tends to get converted into financial capital over the life of an individual. So in your life cycle analysis, you need to find out at which stage is he currently in and what is the future and how will his composition of assets change in future. So this is just an illustration of how generally these assets or these kinds of capital change or composition of these capital changes change over the life of an individual. So let's look into it in percentage terms instead of absolute amount. So if you look into it in percentage terms, then at the start of his career, that is 25 years of age, highest proportion of his capital is human capital. That is, a major portion is human capital, that is roughly 90%. And then there is a small amount in pension capital and a very, very small financial capital. As he moves ahead, as he reaches, let's say 45, his portion of human capital or proportion of human capital decreases about to, let's say 60%. From 90% it decreases to 60%. His proportion of financial asset capital increases to 10%. His proportion of pension wealth also increases to, let's say 20%. And he has also got some investments into real estate now, that is also becoming a part of his portfolio. As he moves ahead, at the age of 65, maybe here he is retiring. So at the age of 65, when he retires, his human capital becomes zero. That is, once he has retired, he won't be having any future earnings. So his human capital has reduced to zero. And there is a major portion of his assets is pension wealth and financial assets. So financial assets have continued to increase and pension wealth has also continued to increase, and he has also made some investments in real estate, so that has also increased throughout the life. Now as he moves beyond 65, he will start consuming his financial assets. So as he start consuming his financial assets proportion will fall, and he may, after that, he may want to buy a home or buy a house, so he may convert some financial assets into real estate. So real estate is, as you see, increasing, and pension fund is now being used to meet his spending needs. So it has also reduced, and after reducing, it has come to a specific proportion, and it is maintaining that proportion. Why? Because his consumption needs might remain be constant. So this is how the overall capital composition changes over the life of an individual. This is again important, so remember this. So you should be able to identify that what is the kind of composition at the start, what is the kind of composition at retirement, what is the kind of composition in post-retirement. So moving on, once you have understood or developed the holistic balance sheet, then comes the individual risk exposure. That you analyze that what are the kind of risks that this individual is exposed to. And within these risk exposures, we discussed earning risk, premature death risk, longevity risk, property risk, liability risk, and health risk. So something that we have already discussed, you know what is earnings risk, you know what is premature death risk or mortality risk, you know what is longevity risk, that is uncertainty surrounding how long retirement will last, and specifically the risk associated with living to an advanced age in retirement. Monte Carlo simulation is used to calculate the probability that the funds will last for a specified number of years. That is one method. Another method is mortality table, that is adjusted for health factors uh, and years for being more conservative. So this is again something that we discussed in previous classes as well. We discussed Monte Carlo, we discussed mortality table. Those can be used to analyze longevity risk. This is something that we have already done in previous classes. Next is property risk. What is property risk? Property risk is the risk that the property may be damaged, destroyed, stolen, or lost. By property, we do not only mean real estate property, we mean any property that or any assets that individual own. There can be direct loss, there can be indirect loss. What is direct loss? It is the loss. It is the loss in monetary. It is the monetary value of the loss associated with property itself. So for example, if you have an asset and it got, let's say it got stolen or it got lost, then that is a direct loss. You have lost the monetary value of that asset. There can be indirect loss, that is expense incurred in living elsewhere if damage repair process of property requires the family to live elsewhere. So what is indirect loss? It is kind of an opportunity cost. So let's say if you have a house and that house got damaged. So if it got damaged, that is a direct loss. So as it got damaged, you may need to get it repaired, and while you get it repaired, you may need to live elsewhere, and when you live elsewhere, you will have to pay some rent, and when you pay that rent, that is indirect loss. So indirect loss is kind of, you can say, in other words, opportunity cost, and direct loss is the monetary loss associated with that asset. Normally considered to be associated with potential loss of financial capital, property used in business to create income is rightfully considered in discussion of human capital. So if property is being used in a business to create income, then that is usually considered a part of human capital. Why? Because that is being used or being linked to future income. Otherwise, generally property will be related to financial capital, or generally property risk will be related to financial capital risk. Next is liability risk, possibility that an individual or household may be held legally liable for a financial cost associated with property damage or physical injury. Health risk, risk and implications associated with illness or injury, and this will be related to human capital risk. So these are some risk exposures. When you are given a case or you are given characteristics of an individual or a story of an individual, you should be able to find out that what from this list of risks, what are the risks that that individual is exposed to, and why do you think that individual is exposed to those risks. So you should be able to identify the key term, and then you should be able to give 2 or 3 reasons to justify that why do you think he is exposed to this risk. So knowing these terms is important, and also knowing the definition of these terms is important. So if you just, so if I give you a story of an individual, and if I ask you what are the risks that this individual is exposed to, and you have just give me these descriptions without telling me the exact risk or exact identifying the exact name or term, then the chances are that you won't get good marks, because as a finance professional and as a portfolio manager, you need to know the exact terms and you need to know their exact meanings. So remember these key terms and remember their definition. Similarly, everywhere in this balance sheet, you should know the key terms and you should know their definitions, economic balance sheet and all. And also in financial stages of life, you should know the key terms and their definition. Just knowing the details is not important. Knowing the exact term is also important for brevity and for to be brief in your answers. So you should know what falls in each of the components of the risk management framework, and you should know what does that actually mean. So this is a kind of you can say a discussion on framework for individual risks management. So once you have passed through all of this, or once you have performed all of these tasks, then the next question is that how should you manage those risks? And in order for you to decide that how should you manage those risks, you need to know uh, you need to know the tools used for management. And what are the key tools used for management of for risk management of human related to human capital? The key tools used are insurance and annuities that we discussed earlier in class as well. So first, this reading will discuss in detail the insurance and annuities, the types of insurance that you have, the types of annuities that you have, and then after that it will go into applying those concepts on the individuals. So starting with insurance. Within insurance, there can be different types of insurance, as I discussed earlier as well, or as I emphasized earlier as well, that a key type of insurance under discussion in this reading is life insurance. So within insurance, we have life insurance, we have disability income insurance, we have property insurance, we have health and medical insurance, we have liability insurance, and we have some other types of insurances. And amongst these types of insurance, the most important is life insurance. So first of all, you will need to decide that what tools that you need to use in order to manage the risk, whether will you use insurance or annuity, or will you use both. Then once you have decided that, then you will need to check that which type of insurance or annuity should you use. So starting with insurance, first type under discussion here is life insurance. What are the uses of life insurance? It is hedge against the risk of the premature death of an earner. It transfers the risk to third party. It is an important estate planning tool. Provides immediate liquidity to a beneficiary without the delay involved in legal process. That is, if a person dies, then immediately the insured amount will be paid to the beneficiary, and there won't be a need for probate or for a legal process for the transfer of wealth. This liquidity can be particularly valuable if estate contains illiquid assets or assets that are difficult to separate and distribute equitably. Tax sheltered savings instruments, notably in the United States. So these are some uses of life insurance. It can help you with estate planning, it can help you with transfer of wealth, it can help you hedge against the risk of premature death of an earner. It transfers the risk to third party. These are certain uses. What are the types of life insurance? There can be different types of life insurance, and two categories for life insurance are, two key categories are temporary life insurance and permanent life insurance. What is temporary life insurance? It provides insurance for a certain period of time specified at purchase. So maybe 10 years, 20 years, 15 years, or whatever. So if the insurance is providing you only if third party is providing you the insurance for only a certain period of time, that is known as temporary life insurance. And if the insurance is being provided for all of your life or for the whole lifetime, then that is known as permanent life insurance. So there can be two types. Within permanent life insurance, there can be different types. So there can be a whole life insurance and there can be universal life insurance. What is whole life insurance? It remains in force for an insured, by insured means the person being insured, by for an insured entire life. In universal life insurance, the policy owner has the ability to pay higher or lower premium payments. What does it mean? Whole life insurance is the one in which you have got an insurance, a fixed insurance for the whole life. Universal life insurance is the one in which you can change your premium or payment of premium or insurance characteristics over the time. So you can pay higher premium or you can pay lower premium. With higher premium you can get higher coverage, and with lower premium you can get lower coverage. Many permanent life insurance policies have a non-forfeiture clause. What is non-forfeiture clause? It means that the policy owner has the option to receive some portion of the benefits if premium payments are missed. So if you have missed the premium payments, you have the option to receive some portion of the benefits. That is, some portion of the benefits can still be received. You won't be able to receive full you won't be able to receive complete benefits due to missing the premium payments, but you can still receive some portion of the benefits. This is known as non-forfeiture clause. This can be a clause in some of the insurance types and might not be a clause in some other policies. But just remember the term. When the insured is not the policy owner, so insured is usually the policy owner. By policy owner means the person who has bought the policy. So the person being insured is usually the policy owner. But in some cases, he might not be the policy owner. Maybe there is someone else who has bought the policy or who has got someone else insured. So for example, there can be a company that is buying insurance for his employee. So company will be the policy owner and the employee being insured is known as the insured. So when this happens that insured is not the policy owner must have an insurable interest in the life of the insured. Means that policy owner must derive some type of benefit from the continued survival of the insured. That is, for example, if there is a company, then company will be getting some type of benefit from the continued survival of the insured or the person being insured. So this is about types of insurance, uses of life insurance, types of life insurance. Moving on, next is how life insurance is priced. So how do you price life insurance? So generally how any insurance works is that there is a policy buyer or policy owner that is paying a premium. So a premium is paid by the buyer of insurance, and then when there is an accident or when there is a particular event on which insurance coverage is contingent to be paid, then at that event the third party or the insurance company pays the buyer of insurance the benefit or the coverage amount. This is how it all works. So how do you price the insurance? How do you decide that how much should be the premium? The premium would depend on different factors, and those factors are related to risk. If risk is high, then premium will be higher. If risk is lower, then premium will be lower. Apart from that, within pricing there are certain terms that we use, and you need to know those terms or the meanings of those terms. So there are three key elements that are used when you are pricing the life insurance: mortality expectations, discount rate, and loading. What is mortality expectation? Mortality expectation means the expectation of the life or average life or expected life of an individual. That how long would the individual live. When deciding that, you need to check the habits of the individual. So if an individual is a smoker, he would have a higher mortality, longer life expectation. If he is a non-smoker, he would have longer life expectation. If he is a smoker, he would have shorter life expectation. Age and gender can sometimes also be related. If he has high age, then there will be, if he is old, then there is shorter life expectation. If he is young, there is high life expectation. Gender can also affect it. So for you can find tables or you can find researches that would relate smoking with gender. That is, if males are smokers and of particular age, then what is the mortality expectation? If there is a female who is a smoker of particular age, then what is the mortality expectation? There are tables that you can get. Then excess weight, health issues, activities such as scuba diving. If he is engaging into risk taking activities, then the expectation for life will be short. And if he is not engaging into risk taking activities, then expectation for life will be higher. So in order to decide mortality expectation, these are certain factors that are looked at, and apart from these factors there will be many other factors as well. We'll come to net premium later. Let's first discuss discount rate. Discount rate, you already know. Discount rate is the rate at which you will be discounting back future cash flows to present, or future. From insurance company's point of view, you will discount back the future expenses to present. So a discount rate or interest rate factor representing an assumption of insurance company's return on its portfolio. It is applied to the expected outflow. That is outflow from the insurance company's point of view. Then comes loading. What is loading? So before we understand loading, and let's understand net premium and gross premium. What is net premium? Net premium represents present value of future death benefit. So if a death benefit of let's say 100,000 or 100 million is has $100,000 has to be paid, then present value of that future death benefit is known as net premium. What is gross premium? So gross premium adds a load to the net premium. What do we mean by load? Load means an additional percentage to the net premium. So net premium is a premium or is a cost that insurance buyer would be paying for present value of future death benefit. But in addition to that, insurance company is running operations or is providing you a product, and in providing that product it would be incurring some administrative expenses or some other expenses. So it will charge the protection buyer for those expenses as well, and in order to charge for those expenses it adds a load to the net premium, and net premium plus load becomes gross premium. So load is that charge or that cost which is a part of premium being paid by protection buyer, and this part or this load represents the expenses being incurred by the insurance company. So when a protection buyer is paying a premium, it will have two components. One will be the premium or the cost of present value of future death benefit, that he will get a future a benefit at death, and present value of that benefit, for present value of that benefit he needs to pay a premium. In addition to that, insurance company is providing this product and running a company, so it is incurring some expenses, so he need to pay for expenses as well. So this is known as load. This portion of the premium is known as load. So net premium is adjusted upward using the load, and load plus net premium becomes gross premium. So these are three key elements that are used or considered in life insurance pricing. And how do you price it? Simply speaking, you will discount back future outflows to present. So insurance company will estimate that what can be the loss, what are the chances of loss in first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and so on. So let's say there is a 5% chance of loss here, 10% here, 15% here, 20%, and so on. And then it will decide that how much would be the loss if loss occurs. So let's say that the loss will be 100,000 here, loss will be 90,000 here, 80,000 here, and so on. And then it will take probability weighted average of these losses. And once it has probability weighted average of these losses, it can calculate the present value of these losses, and based on that it can price the insurance, or it can come up with a premium. So this is how pricing is done. Moving on, we are still on life insurance. Next topic within life insurance is cash values and policy reserves. Although initial premiums are higher, whole life policies offer the advantage of level premiums and an accumulation of cash value. It can be withdrawn by the policy owner when the policy endorse or when he or she terminates the policy, or it can be borrowed as a loan while keeping the policy in force. So before we go into this, first thing that you should understand is that what actually is cash value. So when you buy an insurance and when you are processing through an insurance, there are two types of, so insurance would have a face value, or the policy would have a face value. That is the value of that policy. That is the amount that you will get if certain event happens. So there will be certain value of any policy or any insurance that you have bought. Within that face value, you have two components. One is insurance value and the other is cash value. So when you start the policy, let's say you are starting it today, you are protected against certain event. Let's say I have bought a life insurance, so I am protected against death, right? Or against any disability or something like that. But I haven't paid any amount, or I have paid only the first installment, that is very low. So the cash that I have paid is very low and the insurance that I am getting against it is very high. But as I move ahead, I will be paying more and more. So the cash that I am paying will continue to increase, and against that the insurance value that I am getting will continue to decrease. Why? Because for this insurance value, for this, if I break it here, for this much of insurance value I have already paid a cash. So insurance value will, or insured value will continue to convert into cash value. If let's say insured value is 100,000, as I continue to pay cash, this will continue to reduce. So let's say if I paid 10,000 cash, now 10,000 is my cash value and 90,000 is my insurance value. I paid 10,000 more next year. So 20,000 now is my cash value and 80,000 is my insurance value. And so it continue to decrease. So over time, cash value will continue to increase and insurance value will continue to decrease. That is the portion of policy face value. More portion of face value would become cash value and a lesser portion would become insurance value in later years of insurance. So this is how it changes. There can be certain provisions within a policy that can allow the policy buyer to withdraw the cash value. So there can be certain provisions that can allow the policy owner to withdraw this cash value or to change this cash value into a loan, keeping the policy in force. That is, after this policy, keeping the policy in force and changing this cash value into a loan. So there can be certain provisions like this in which this cash value can be withdrawn, but obviously there will be penalties or there can be some limitations onto that. The important point is that you should know this concept of insurance value and cash value. It is important to recognize interrelationship of the following amounts. The premium stays constant, face value stays constant, cash value increases, insurance value decreases. As you see here, face value is constant. Within that face value, the portion of insurance value and cash value is changing. And premium is also constant. Cash value is increasing, insurance value is decreasing. This is about cash value concept. Policy reserves are especially important for whole life policies. Insurance company specifies an age at which the policy's face value will be paid as an endowment to the policy owner if the insured person has not died by that time. So what is a policy reserve? In policy reserve, insurance company specifies at an age that if till that age insured person does not die, then there will be a certain amount of face value that will be paid even if he hasn't died. The insurance company must accumulate reserves during the life of policy to be able to make this payment, and those reserves are known as policy reserves. That is, there will be a reserve, it will be paid throughout the life of insurance. Insurance company will be putting in some money into that reserve, and if let's say there is a cutoff age of 70, and if at 70 the insured person does not die, then it will be paying this accumulated amount to the insured person. This is policy reserve. So these are again some features of life insurance. We are still on life insurance. So we discussed uses of life insurance, we discussed types of life insurance, then we discussed how it is priced, then we discussed certain more provisions or options that we have with respect to life insurance, that is cash value and policy reserves. Now next is consumer comparisons of life insurance cost. So if there are two different life insurances, how do a consumer compare the cost of those life insurances? So in order to compare the cost of life insurances, there are two popular indexes that are used, and these are net payment cost index and surrender cost index. What is net payment cost index? Net payment cost index assumes that insured person will die at the end of a specified period, such as let's say 20 years. Surrender cost index assumes that the policy will be surrendered at the end of the period. That is, there will be a certain period, and after that period policy will be surrendered. So these are two different types of cost indexes that are used, and these are two different assumptions for these cost indexes. You should know the assumptions, and you should know the key points related to these. Major benefit of these indexes is the ease of comparing policies of the same type. The lower the index value is, the better the value. Why? Because these are the indexes for cost. They are kind of a measure for cost, and lower the cost, higher will be your value. These indexes can be used for comparing different policies. So moving on, what is net payment cost index? You calculate the future value of an annuity due of an amount equal to the premium. Calculate the future value of an ordinary annuity. So here we are calculating future value of annuity due, and here we are calculating future value of ordinary annuity. of an amount equal to the projected annual dividend. So this is the payment that you are making. So you are calculating kind of future value of payment, and this is the benefit that you are getting. So you are calculating future value of kind of benefit that you are getting. You will be making first payment today. So as you are making first payment today, then that is NVT due, and you will be receiving benefit at the end of the period. So as you receive it at the end of the period, that is ordinary NVT. Now this is your payment, this is your benefit. If you take the difference of these two, that is if you do payment minus benefit, it will give you net payment, right? So you take A, you take B. If you subtract B from A, that is if you subtract benefit from payment, it will give you net payment. Now this is your net payments of NVT. Calculate the payments for an NVT due with a future value equal to C. So now you take this as future value. Why? Because this is the future value. You took future value of payment, you subtracted future value of benefit. When you subtracted future value of benefit from future value of payment, you got the future value of net payment. Now you come up with an NVT, that what will be the NVT or what will be the periodic payment to arrive at that future value, at this future value of net payment. And once you have that, you divide it by the face value. And when you divide it by the base face value, you will get certain percentage, let's say 5%, and that will be the net payment cost index. Now you can take another policy. For that policy, you can calculate future value of payment, future value of benefit, take difference, and then calculate the NVT amount and then divide it by the face value, and you can get another net payment cost index for that particular policy. Let's say for that policy, you get the net payment cost index of 6%. Which one is better? This has a lower cost, so this is better. So simply speaking, while this looks complex, it is very simple. What we are doing is we first calculate future value of payments. These are NVTs and these are NVT due. Then we calculate future value of benefits. This is ordinary NVT. We subtract benefits from payment to arrive at equals to future value of net payment, right? Now we know that this is the amount that we are effectively paying at a future date. If we are paying this amount at a future date, then what are the annual payments or monthly payments that we will be making? We can use this as future value and calculate NVT payment. This is the periodic payment that we will be making. And if we are making this payment, there is certain face value that we are getting. And if we divide this payment by face value, we will get the percentage of payment. That what is our percentage premium as a, what is our payment, net payment as a percentage of face value. And then we can compare this percentage of two different policies. Next is surrender cost index. In this you calculate the future value of NVT, same as we did here. Calculate the future value of an ordinary NVT, same as we did here. Subtract B and the final projected cash value from A to get the 20-year cost insurance. The only difference is in previous example we only subtracted B. Here we will also have a projected cash value. Here we will not only subtract B, but we will also have a final projected cash value. That is what is the final cash value that will be paid in future, and we will also subtract that. So we subtract B as this benefit, annual benefit, and we also subtract final projected cash value. Then we calculate payments. Similarly, we calculate payments for NVT using this number, and this amount is the interest adjusted cost per year. Then we divide this amount per year by the face value to get the percentage. Only difference is that we are also using this final projected cash value here in surrender cost index. So this is how these two work. As long as you know the method, you should be able to do it. Here is a calculation that future value of premiums is this much. So there is a question in which you are given the number of years. that is 20 years, you are given discount rate that is 5%, and you are given the annual payment that is 2000. If you plug this in your calculator, you can calculate future value of premium. How your N will be 20. You will first also remember, you will first convert your calculator to BGN mode, right? Why? Because this is NVT due, and for NVT due you need to convert your calculator to BGN mode. And do you know how to convert it? So you can just try it now. You will press shift, that is second, you will press set, then you will press second again, and you will press BGN. When you do this, you will get your calculator will be converted to BGN mode. So you convert it to BGN mode. Why? Because this is the payment of premium, and prepayment of premium will start at the start of the year. And so you calculate, for calculating future value of premium, you need to convert your calculator to BGN mode, that is NVT due mode. You plug in N as 20, you plug in PMT as 2000, you plug in IY as 5%, you plug in PV as 0, and when you calculate future value, it will be 69439. Should be, if anything else is not missing. So this is your future value of premium or your payment. Now you need to get the future value of benefit. The benefit is ordinary NVT of dividends. Why ordinary NVT? Because you will be getting it at the end of year. Again, you convert your calculator from begin to normal mode. You use annual payment of 500 and 20. IY is your interest or yield is your 5%, and PV is your again 0. And when you calculate future value, it will be 16533. And why do they have a negative sign? Because you need to subtract this benefit from payment. Once you subtract this benefit from payment, it will give you the future value of net payment. Then you plug this in your calculator as future value. You plug in the rate, you plug in the number of years, and you calculate the NVT amount. NVT amount is 1524. You divide it by the face value, and you get your net payment cost index. That is cost per US dollar cost per $1,000 of face value. So it will be 100,000. So as it is 100,000, we take it the face value in 1000. So we will take it as . So any confusion in this net payment cost index, you should be able to calculate it using the calculator. This is important, so remember it. Then there is surrender cost index. In surrender, you do the same thing. You calculate future value of premium, you calculate future value of payment, you calculate future value of benefit. And in addition to that, you also need to calculate the cash value at the end of 20 years, and that will be given to you. So projected cash value is given as 22,500. You take the differences, you get your net cost future value. You calculate based on this future value, you calculate NVT, and based on that, you calculate your surrender cost index. So you should be able to calculate this. This is very, very important. Last part or section in life insurance is how much life insurance does one need. So how do you decide that what are the that how much life insurance should be given to one or should be taken by someone? So there are certain reasons that are considered for life insurance. So life insurance can be used to replace the present value of future earnings. So if present value of future earnings is very high, you may want to take a life insurance. If present value of future earnings is very low, you may not want to take a insurance. Immediate financial expenses, that are direct costs associated with death, for example, funeral. Legacy goals, for example, gifts to charities, bequests to family members, and estate planning. So these are certain reasons that are used or considered for life insurance. Value of life insurance should be equal to household spending with human capital minus household spending without human capital of the earner. So that means that spending with human capital minus spending without human capital, what would this give you? This will give you the spending from human capital. So the spending from human capital should be insured, and so the value of life insurance should be present value of spending from human capital. And how do you get present value of spending from human capital? That is household spending with a person or the earner minus household spending without that earner in your family. The cost of insurance is also an important consideration when deciding how much life insurance is needed. If cost is high, you may not want to go for a higher value insurance. If the cost is low, you may want to go for a higher value. Assess insurance company's ability to meet financial obligations. How do you assess it? Through company credit ratings or through other measures of company risk profile. So this is about life insurance. It is very, very important. Emphasize again, and here is an example, so let's do it. Consider two potential life insurance candidates: a 40-year-old doctor who is married with two young children, substantial student loans, substantial liabilities, and sizable earnings. Sizable earnings means that human capital is high and liabilities are also high, and he's 40-year who is married with two young children. 35-year-old single person with a moderate amount of financial wealth. Based on the information presented, which person should be more appropriate candidate for life insurance and why? So from this, he looks to be more appropriate, that is 40-year-old. Why? Because he has liabilities and so is exposed to some risk of failing to meet the liabilities, so he need to get some protection. He has sizable earnings, so as he has sizable earnings, a large portion will be human capital, so he needs to protect that. And he has a family, so he needs to reduce the risk of failing to meet the spending needs. So he needs to be this first one looks a more appropriate candidate for life insurance. Given that doctor has substantial debt and high earnings, the value of his individual earnings potential human capital is significant. Likewise, with two young children, there is a high dependence on future earnings, representing another reason the earnings potential should be hedged with life insurance. In contrast, the 35-year-old does not have any beneficiaries that would need to be supported, but the younger individual may want to consider purchasing insurance while he or she is still insurable. So from these two, the more appropriate candidate is first one. So you should be able to identify who needs life insurance, who does not need it, who needs how much. And simply speaking, if human capital is high, then life insurance is needed. If human capital is low, life insurance is not needed. Let's take a break. We go on.